Welcome to you all, old friends and new, young and old. You're an essential part of our celebration today. Whether this is your first or your 1000th Sunday in our midst, we are stronger because you're with us. We are one people of many beliefs, many origins and sexualities. We are all growing, all learning, all loved. Just as you are welcome here. I will call us to worship with a reading from our hymnal. What good is it, my brother and sisters, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says, "Go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill," and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I by my works will show you my faith. This morning's service focuses on the terrible consequences of slavery in the United States that continue to this day. Some communities, such as Amherst, are trying to focus on reparations for local African Americans. Our UU first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and our sixth principle, to work for peace, liberty, and justice for all, speaks directly to this reparations work. Bob Romer, a member of our Sunday Services Committee, will introduce our speaker this morning, Amilcar Shabazz. Bob?
Good morning. I'm Bob Romer. As Carolyn just said, a member of the Sunday Services Committee. Welcome to the Amherst Unitarian Church. It's my pleasure today to introduce our guest speaker, a friend and colleague, Professor Amilcar Shabazz. Amilcar is Professor of History and Africana Studies at UMass in the W.E.B. Du Bois Department of Afro-American Studies, where he has been since 2007. For some time, he's been heavily involved in thinking and writing about the complicated and important issue of reparations. He has also served the town of Amherst in many other ways as a member of the school committee, the regional school committee, the town gown steering committee, and most significantly for today's topic, he is also a member of the recently formed Town Committee on Reparations, the AHRA, which stands for the African Heritage and Reparations Assembly. Without further ado, Professor Shabazz.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank everyone for this opportunity to say a few words in the way of, as it was described, of a sermon. And Dr. Romer and I had a little back and forth on that word, but it's of great significance to me. The first sermon that I learned as a sermon was at that time when Jesus Christ, as we're told in the Bible, went out to the mountainside, and there was a multitude there, and he gathered with his disciples and began to teach them in what we today call the Beatitudes. And those words resonate so strongly in my mind, the blessings that were bestowed there. Blessed are those persecuted for righteousness' sake. Blessed are the meek, and then the rewards that would come to those so blessed. I also woke up this morning thinking of the story of the Good Samaritan. And in that story, we have a Jewish man being assaulted by robbers on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. And he's left there, he's bloody, he's imminently going to die if he doesn't get any care or attention. And other Jews are walking by and will go on the other side of the road to not be bothered with this sad, terrible sight. And finally, coming along on the road is the Good Samaritan, who doesn't go on the opposite side to go away. He approaches the Jewish individual who's hurt there, gives them, dresses their wound, pours oil, gives wine to revitalize the person, puts him on his own animal, his own, and ride him into town, ride him into a hotel, pays the hotel some denarii, and says, look, if there's any more on the bill for this person as they get well, I'll pay them on my way back. And that being a story of looking at the prejudice that in general Samaritans and Jews did not have good relations, that if in other circumstances, a Samaritan would have approached to touch a Jewish person, that Jewish person would have like, oh, don't even touch me. But here it is, that here's where real compassion came. Here's where real care and the work to help restore the person who was injured. Reparations, for me, has been a long journey. The very first person from Amherst, Massachusetts, that I ever met in my life was William Darity Jr. We learned and met him and knew him as Sandy Darity. He encouraged us to call him Sandy. Of course, Dr. Darity in professional circumstances, but Sandy, was more than just that. And a teacher to us, he really was a friend. He was and not too much older than me. He had just finished MIT. He was down at the University of Texas at Austin, his first full-time tenure track job. And I was his one and only African heritage undergraduate student in the economics department. That was my major. I was the only Black undergrad at the time. And he gave me a great deal of attention and mentorship. He, as well as another peer of his from MIT, Dr. Sam Myers. And they showered a great deal of attention, helped me to stay the course, finish my degree in economics there at the University of Texas at Austin. And so I've been knowing him since 1979. First person from Amherst, Massachusetts I ever met. He graduated from Amherst Regional High School. As was noted by Dr. Romer, I've served on the district that the committee that passes the budget and evaluates the superintendent over those schools. And so to meet Sandy and to be challenged by him way back then and mentored by him, and then to see and learn and to see him today become such a leader, an intellectual force in the fight for reparations nationally, it's quite an arc for me from 1979 to the present. His book, which when it first came out, we had occasion to organize a Zoom discussion. It's available on Amherst Media, is From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. And it's co-written with his partner, his wife, Andrea Kirsten Mullen, who was a classmate of mine. We were both undergrads. We were both students. Myself in economics, she was in folklore. And they have two sons together. They and live down in North Carolina, where Sandy's father and family's from. His father was the first African-American to graduate from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, with a PhD. William Darity Sr., who after a stint with the World Health Organization and other posts, ultimately comes to live in Amherst and becomes the founder and the dean of our School of Public Health. So, and known to many throughout this community for his many years living here and the work he's done here. So I need to say no more about that. But Dr. Darity particularly challenges those of us in the movement for local reparations recently in an article, and I've put some links in the chat. And by way of these remarks today, I'd like to speak to some of the points he observes in this article that is entitled "How to Hijack true reparations, give your blessings to local, state, and institution piecemeal plans. And he co-writes this with Kirsten, and he argues that local initiatives that call themselves reparations purport to acknowledge decades of atrocities directed against their Black residents. These atrocities include housing discrimination, for example, Evanston, Illinois, Asheville, North Carolina, Kansas City, Missouri, and Austin, Texas, unchecked violence and abusive practices of police acting on orders of their commanding officers, Chicago, Illinois, enslavement of Black people, Providence, Rhode Island, and direct, indirect, intentional, and unintentional harm caused by racialized city contracts and residential policies, Austin, Texas. He doesn't actually chastise Amherst in that list, but I've been on the phone with him just very recently, and I know he watches us here in Amherst, and he many of his concerns that are brought up in this piece are directed against Amherst as well. He says, however desirable local initiatives of this sort may be, they cannot be described legitimately as reparations. To be precise, they are racial equity initiatives, and that is what they should be called, not reparations. We insist that the term reparations be reserved for a comprehensive policy of redress for Black American descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. Specifically, Black reparations must refer to a project that eliminates the nation's staggering racial wealth gap. In the article, they go on to identify true reparations as incorporating 4 essential elements. The first being this eligibility question, that eligible recipients must be individuals who have self-identified as Black, Negro, African-American, or Afro-American for at least 12 years before the adoption of a reparations plan or a study commission for reparations. 2, true reparations requires the plan to erase Black-white difference in wealth by building Black assets to a level comparable to those held by whites. He notes the point that while African Americans are 12% of the US population, the amount of wealth that population holds is less than 2% of America's wealth. And so the closing of the wealth gap is to bring in line with the percentage of the population, the percentage of wealth that African Americans hold. And there are some issues with that, but let's keep going. It says that as of 2020, Black American descendants of US slavery, as I said, are 12% of the population, but possess less than 2% of the nation's wealth. Raising the Black share of wealth up to the Black share of the nation's population requires an expenditure of $11 trillion. Third, true reparations require direct payments to eligible recipients. In previous cases of group-based reparations, payments were made to the members of the affected community. For example, German payments to victims of the Holocaust, as well as US government payments to Japanese Americans subjected to mass incarceration during World War II and to families that lost loved ones during the 9/11 terrorist attacks. It should be no different from Black American descendants of US slavery, who should have similar discretion over the use of funds. Finally, the federal government is the culpable party and must pay the debt. And he goes on to argue that, and he goes on they go on to make an analysis of the weakness of the Evanston plan, and then finally conclude that the greatest danger is local reparations, like Evanston's program, can divert the nation from achieving full restitution. Sadly, some longstanding advocacy organizations have lent credibility to these piecemeal efforts by championing them. What they tout as a dramatic victory for the reparations movement is in fact a Pyrrhic victory for the cause of redress. Mislabeled as reparations, steps like the Evanston Plan and similar local initiatives ultimately subvert the case for essential federal action. Now, my rejoinder to this, and particularly as we look at what and imagine what reparations can mean in Amherst, is that is to think about this idea of diversion and how, in fact, do we build a national will and a national consensus for reparations. Dr. Romer was a participant in a previous mass-based movement designed to that emerged to try to address the effects of white supremacy and of the history and legacy of slavery and racism in the United States, what we call the civil rights movement. He says it wasn't much of a march that he made in terms of the March on Washington, because he and some buddies came down. They had a hotel room. They went out, and but he did do a little bit of a march. But he does talk about the impact that the experience had on him, and how he comes back afterwards and engages in the fight locally here in Amherst. And when he felt there wasn't much of a real push here in Amherst, and even at Amherst College, there was more talk than action. And we talk about faith without works. So his faith took him to South Carolina, as he describes his least favorite state in the Union. And there he finds himself spending a year teaching at an historically Black college, which in '69, Black colleges and Black students were blowing up all over the place in the aftermath of Dr. King's death. And there he is, as a professor, teaching physics, I would imagine. And so but the involvement, the attempt to put into action where his mind, his intellect, and his faith guided him is what I want to call attention to. He was making an effort as an individual and in local context that builds toward the national will and the national consensus to try and enact major changes. How do we build toward this consensus? Right now, the HR 40, which Dr. Darity has analyzed and marked up as a terrible piece of federal legislation. He envisions a different and a stronger kind of measure than HR 40, but even that's locked up with 196 sponsors, people ready for HR 40, but it still hasn't moved to the floor for a vote. 190, you need 218 to pass. And it still can't get there. It passes the Hastert test. The majority of the majority party is in favor of it. So it should go to the vote, to the floor for a vote. And yet it's tied up. And then we know in the Senate, we face even dire prospects. So how do we generate the national will and the national consensus to move forward, if not HR 40, the more improved legislation that Dr. Darity has advocated? How do we get there? Well, to me, it's going to take, whether you call it reparations or not, it's going to take local grassroots efforts to grapple with the legacy of harm, to specifically identify and to specifically reach out to the descendants of those enslaved in this country, as well as more generally, people of African heritage who have lived and live in situations of racial discrimination and of terrible disparities, not only in wealth, but in so many other indicators. So we get there through this kind of local work. Call it what you wish, whether you prefer us to call it a racial equity initiatives or not. To me, it is still about how do we repair the fabric of our society? How do we repair that fabric right here in Amherst? I want to suggest one of the key areas, and I will be advocating for this on the African Heritage Reparations Assembly, is in the area of giving direct repair and reparations to our ancestors, to those who were enslaved. I put in the link as well to Dr. Romer's book. I consider this book an extension of his activism for justice through that marked his life in publishing that work. And in it, if you look at the cover, has anyone looked at it before? Do you know what's on the cover? Carolyn, what's on the cover? Don't know. On the cover is the ad for a runaway slave, a fugitive, someone who self-emancipated themselves and left their owner, their master, the person who asserted private ownership of their body, left. And the ad goes on to give a description of what they were wearing, of how tall they were, of their general presentation, how well they spoke English, and so on, and was designed for a very specific person to get them back under the control of their master, of this person asserting ownership. The individual's name was Pump. And this ad comes out within a year of Amherst breaking away from Hadley and becoming its own municipality, its own incorporated entity. So from the very beginning of Amherst as the town of Amherst, we have the evidence, the documentation, and the existence of the institution of slavery in our town, sanctioned by our town, blessed by our town, indeed blessed by the very ministers of the spirituality of the faith of the town. And this is marked in, is evident to us in this ad itself. We even go further, and my friend Cinda Jones has provided me with documentation that exists about what may have been the last person of African heritage to have been formally enslaved and under the institution of slavery in Amherst, someone known as Wealthy. Wealthy. She was owned by a member of Cinda's family, not a direct ancestor, but the brother of her direct ancestor. That the evidence isn't completely clear on how the purchase came about, or in what way or how or why they held this person. Perhaps it was to secure their life. And eventually we know that the person is, of course, as institution of slavery fades from Massachusetts, that relationship fades as well. But the place we mark as the oldest physical structure in Amherst that's still standing, what on the campus of the University of Massachusetts is called the University Club. This is where she lived, at one point where Wealthy lived, where she cooked, where she served, in place that today, or after COVID is over, is a place where food is cooked and prepared and served. Where is the marker for Wealthy Wheeler? Where is the marker that records this history, any of this history of the existence of slavery in this space? So how do we repair that? How do we repair the historical record to acknowledge this tremendous harm, psychically, socially, spiritually, that Amherst, the town of Amherst, participated in? I say it does so by us working to develop a heritage trail, a system of historical markers, of using the SUFA, these standing kind of like a big iPads that the town invested in and has at different places across the town. You can program it with different information that'll cycle through on it. They might all be kind of turned off right now in the snow, but they're designed to be out. They're out there all the time, 24/7. How about programming the SUFA with some of the information about this? And further, I believe we can make the town of Amherst a kind of heritage tourism destination if we will do this work and stand out with this work. I have testified before a joint committee of the Senate and the General Court for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for the development of an African-American history museum and research center in Springfield. And I support that. Bud Williams has been continued to introduce the legislation that Ben Swan initially started. And that's beginning to kind of work its way up to start a study to identify land, space, to build this Museum of African American History and Culture and Research Center of the Underground Railroad. I'd like us to commit ourselves here in Amherst to a spur institution, an institution off of that would record and document the history, the genealogy, the stories of the African American community, not only from the times of slavery, but all the way up to the present, and be that genealogical, historical center that could also become part of anchoring this heritage that we have here that has not been acknowledged. There's still, to my knowledge, only 3 markers of persons of African heritage in the town of Amherst. There is a trail in North Amherst named for Julius Lester. There is, of course, on the UMass campus, the library is named for W.E.B. Du Bois, and my department is named for Du Bois, and New Africa House, which is in the graphic behind me, was changed from Mills House. And then over at what was formerly known as the Lord Jeff, now the Inn at Boltwood, there is a marker, part of the Writers' Walk, that was funded by Community Preservation Act funds by Amherst. They have one African-American writer in that Writers' Walk, and that's Shirley Graham Du Bois, a former faculty member of my department in the 70s. Shirley Graham Du Bois is on a metal marker right outside the Inn at Boltwood. It's a part of about 15, 20 markers that are part of the Writers' Walk with Robert Frost and Emily Dickinson and so on. And so that is the one other thing named for an African-American, or marker for an African descendant person in this town. We can do better, Amherst. The funds are there with the Community Preservation Act monies. We must organize the African-American communities, particularly some of those with the intergenerational heritage, like Anika Lopes and Deborah Bridges and the Bias family with Talib Sadiq, our principal of our high school, to come together. Bob Romer has agreed to act as a part of a consultative group on this. Others I've been speaking to at UMass, at Amherst College, there's Stephen Bradley and other faculty members there. We can do this. We can do it right. We can really stand out, and we can put it under the banner of reparations. I'd love that. I'd be honored by that. Dr. Darity may not like it, but I think he will like the work that's done. His own father should be part of a marker for all the work that he has done in the world, fighting for public health, fighting for improved public health, his work at UMass to create the School of Public Health, and in many other things that his father has done ought to be historically acknowledged. So again, reparations is just a word, but the work that can happen beyond that word is what is most important. The word without work is dead, be it faith, be it reparations, be it racial equity initiatives. Those are all just the words. It is the work that matters. It is the work that matters. And today, I simply hope through these remarks to draw you in to supporting that work, to offering what you can, to not opposing, to encouraging your counselors that when the votes come up to approve the monies, that they know they have your support as their constituents. This matters a lot. Right now, a fund is there dedicated under the label. I'm not even sure whether it's racial equity or actually reparations, but I've been told it's called a stabilization fund of more than $200,000 has been deposited from last year's free cash. That's the amount of money that was budgeted but not spent last year. And instead of just rolling it into this year's budget, it was the council voted unanimously, if I'm not wrong, to go ahead and take that free cash of more than $200,000 and to put it into a fund earmarked for these reparative justice actions that we are planning out on the African Heritage Reparations Assembly. Please let your counselors know, whatever district you're in, that you support this, You encourage them to vote as the plan is produced and as measures are produced for the use of these funds, that they continue to support it, and that we can move forward nationally to be a model for this kind of work. Again, forget the word. Racial equity, reparations, justice, reparative justice, call it what you will. It is the work that matters. Support us, support the votes ultimately by the council for these actions, and continue to pray for us and to pray for the work that we're doing on the African Heritage Reparations Assembly. I know Michelle Miller, our chair, will appreciate your prayers. She has a great deal on her plate with this work, besides her own work for her district, the work that she's doing for the district she's been elected to now. But we all, Hala Lord, Irv Rhodes, myself, Yvonne Mendez, Alexis Reed, we all need your support. And the Black Assembly of Amherst, Massachusetts, all of us that are working in the Black community, to begin to put forward what we think are major priorities. I've given mine today. It's just one, this question of history and heritage. But we are coming together in 2022 in the African heritage community to also look at other issues and that we would like to see redressed and addressed. So pray for us, help us, and to support this work. And thank you today.
We close this time with the words of Wayne Arneson. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard. The path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage. Be deep down. There is another truth. You are not alone.